Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you are entering into the combat zone, where the enemy only has one of four things to say, or he could say all four of them. Abandon ship, bail out, we surrender, and I don't remember the fourth one. Wave the white flag.
You're close.
What?
Well, when you do...
I just said we surrender.
Did you?
Okay, abandon ship, bail out,
take cover.
Take cover. That was it.
The one
Okay.
you were missing.
I was missing take cover.
There you go. Wouldn't do him much good. We'll get him anyway.
Okay. And as Nick would say at this stage, have we got a show for you tonight?
Oh, man.
Well, we always have a show for you guys tonight.
Yes, but this one, well, we've taken it up on Hotch Doggone It.
Well, we're trying to anyway, and we don't really have to take it up too high. Too much excitement to beat Sleeper Bowl LIII.
Z.
Yes, Z. Come on, let's be Canadian here, Nick.
Oh, my God.
Z.
When the national anthem is the highlight of the game, you know you're in for a long nap.
And wasn't that a lunch bag letdown, okay?
Holy
because,
cow.
Everybody's anticipating what's going to happen.
Nothing.
And Gladys Knight comes out. And it's funny because I didn't really realize that it was Gladys Knight. I mean, I knew it was Gladys Knight, but then I'm going, oh my God, it's Gladys Knight. Is she still alive?
I know. She must be in her 70s.
And she's got a great voice still. I don't know if you caught that. Man.
I don't like the style of music she does, but I appreciate the talent she has.
What was her group? Do you remember the group?
Gladys Knight and the Five Pips.
Gladys Knight and the Pips, yeah.
Yes, that was right. Not the Five Pips, the Pips.
The Pips, Gladys Knight and the Pips, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, boy, she must be in her 70s, late 70s. I don't,
Man, I got trouble talking at this age, never mind putting on the vocal performance that she did. So that was the best part of the whole night.
And there was no controversy around it. I understand that she was being pressured to actually not participate, not sing the national anthem. And then I noticed I didn't see any players taking a knee. There was zero controversy around the.
Well, who would they have gotten to sing the? Who did they have as a backup?
I have no idea, but they would have had somebody. I'm sure.
There's something in me that likes it when the whole crowd sings it by itself, rather than have somebody do a rendition. Because one of the great fears I have when I watch a hockey game, I do not listen to the anthems. I'll check in, and if I like it, then I'll listen to it. But for the most part, I don't listen to the anthems because, number one, I don't like the singer. Number two, even if I do, sometimes they make it their own song, and it's not their own song. It's a national anthem. It should stay the same every time you sing it. That way everybody gets to learn it. And the guy in Vancouver 2 years ago during the playoffs, 2 or 3 years ago, did it right. He sang the first 3 or 4 lines, and then he held the microphone up, and 20,000 people sang it, and he just stood there. And that's the way it's supposed to be done. So when you have people come out to do the national anthem at a sporting event, get them started and shut up. Let them sing it.
I still liked the Kate, whatever her name was, rendition. Kate Smith of God Bless America.
Yep.
At the arena in Philadelphia.
What was the name of that arena? Do you remember? Was it the Forum? No, that was Montreal.
Well, there were a few places that had a Forum. I don't know. The Auditorium? Was it the Odd?
Maybe.
I don't remember.
But when she sang, they had a really strong winning record.
She was good. And another guy who was really great was Gilles Doucette. Gilles Doucette. Was it Gilles Doucette?
I thought you said Doucette.
No, not Doucette. It was Doucette.
You're not going to catch him doing that.
Oh, no. It was not Gilles Doucette. It was...
Who do you sing for? Who do you sing it for?
Oh, in Montreal. He was an opera singer. Was it Gilles? Oh, no. Now I can't remember. I see. There you go. It's my. I don't know. Maybe it's my age. It's something. I don't know. It's I've forgotten.
Bob Cole is retiring. He's calling his last Toronto home game tonight. As a matter of fact, as much as I hate to say this, let me check the score. I was watching the game before we went on the show, and I feel better now. The Senators were actually leading the Leafs 2-1. Now the Leafs are winning 3-2. But this is Bob Cole's last game in the ACC. And Bob Cole's a Canadian icon. There's no question about that. I mean, for 50 years he's been calling hockey in Canada, and I think he hit his peak in the 90s. He could make the most dull game sound. He could make watching paint dry sound exciting. And that's something that, whether you like the CBC or not, they had a whole host of people who could do that. Was it Danny Williams? Used to do a lot of football.
I think he still does.
Chris Cuthbert was another one. Howie Meeker was another one. Now, not all these guys were play-by-play guys, but they were all characters involved in Hockey Night in Canada with the CBC. It's one of the few things the CBC ever got right until they got rid of the national anthem, or the unofficial national anthem, and it's just never been the same since. However, I honestly think
these guys could not have made the Super Bowl this year exciting. I mean, let's face facts. 3-3 going into
the first half.
Going into the last quarter. The 3 quarters, they were still tied at 3. The Patriots' touchdown only came in the last quarter.
Well, you know what? This is one of the reasons I love the Canadian Football League. First of all, let me put this caveat in there. I am not debating talent. I mean, if I could make, $1 million a year as a down linesman versus 38 or 40,000 in the NFL versus 38 or 40,000 in the CFL, where would I play? I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure that out. But the game itself is so much better north of the border. Like 3 downs, 110 yards by 60. There's just so much more dynamics to the game that is thoroughly enjoyable and it's one of the reasons why the Grey Cup is usually far better. Better than the Snooze Bowl.
That was me just checking things out online in our show.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry about that, guys.
Oh, it's 4-2 for the Leafs. All right.
Okay, we're not. Forget the Leafs.
No,
we're still waiting for the collapse. Okay, this is not a sports show.
I know, but what are we talking about?
Okay, well, we were listen.
The Snooze Bowl.
It is actually really interesting to talk a little bit about the Super Bowl because it was, for all of the hype, and the Super Bowl is super hype, super commercial, it's super everything. And, I like the American game. I like the American game. And over the years, I have to say, Nick, that I have come to like the American game of football better than the Canadian game. Now,
I gotta work on
having said that, my game is still rugby union. Okay. And we're in the middle of we're at the start now of the Six Nations tournament, which is the premier annual rugby tournament, international rugby tournament. And my team, Wales, was down 17-0 to France. Let me say this, okay?
Okay.
To France at halftime, and they came back to beat France. And it was a spectacular comeback. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the lads.
Okay, is 17 a lot in rugby?
It's very comparable to football. It's very comparable to football. So when you score a try, which would be like a touchdown in football,
right?
It's 5 points instead of 6.
Okay,
but a convert is 2 points instead of 1. So if a touchdown and a convert in rugby comes up to the same thing.
Okay.
And when you kick the ball through the posts, it's still 3 points. The only difference is that is when you're allowed to kick. So if there's a penalty, instead of marching off yards, because they don't play precise yards, okay?
Right.
And I think that's a little silly in the North American football game. Also, this idea of, you're 1 inch short of a first down. They take out the sticks and measure. Oh, you only made it 10 yards and 35 inches. And which, by the way,
9 yards.
I just want to point out that in the Canadian game, it's still 9 yards and 35 inches, even though Canada's metric.
Look, I had
to get that in. But you can, when in rugby, when there's a penalty, you have the option of kicking for goal, which would be 3 points. So if it's the same thing as a field goal, but you kick when there's a penalty. Or you can do this in North American football as well. You can still do a drop kick. And a drop kick that goes through the posts is 3 points in rugby. and it's 3 points in American football.
Well, as long
but
as
you never see that anymore.
You know what? I can't remember the last drop kick I ever saw.
Yeah, I don't recall I don't know that I've ever seen. Maybe once or twice years ago I saw a drop kick.
They taught it to us in high school or in grade school. That tells you how long ago that was. That was back in the early 70s when I was in grade 8. Grade 8 would have been 75. So mid-70s. I remember the principal, Mr. Marintet, was big into sports, and he showed us how to do a proper drop kick. And when you're only 5 feet tall and 120 pounds and he kicks it 60 yards, it looks like it went to the moon. Anyway, okay, so the Sleeper Bowl...
LIII.
ZZZZZ.
ZZZ.
Highly overrated. You're right. It's over everything but the football itself, the game itself. More times than not, is not worth watching.
Well, yeah, it's funny you say that because there have been some very good
Well, that's why I
Super
said more
Bowl
times
games.
than not.
Okay,
I remember the Denver Broncos a few years ago winning one, and I forget the quarterback's name, but the Denver Broncos hadn't won in a while, and they were bound to determine, and I knew they were going to win when the quarterback carried the ball in himself into the end zone.
Yeah, now I know the game you're talking about. And
who was the quarterback?
That was John Elway.
Yes.
But
his
eyes
eyes
were
like this.
But it was not. But he didn't care. I don't believe the play you're talking about was in the Super Bowl. It was in the championship game
to get to the
Super Bowl.
Okay, because they went on to win it.
I believe they did. Yeah,
but I knew they were going to win by the look on his face. His eyes were just on fire. There's nothing going to stop him getting over that zone. So I like American football. Don't get me wrong. I just prefer the Canadian game. I think it's more entertaining, faster pace.
Yeah, which is fair.
Yeah,
that's it's perfectly fair. Not a problem.
Enough of perfectly fair football. Let's get on to some other stuff. Let's talk about State of Union. State of Union address. Now, I watched it online after it was over. I just didn't have the ability to get to it sooner than that, so I thought, it'll be on YouTube, no problem. Sure enough, there it wasn't. There it was.
No, it was on YouTube.
I'm kidding.
Okay.
But anyway, I watched it, and I missed the first 5 or 10 minutes of it. So I didn't hear his opening remarks. I didn't hear his defense of the wall. But what I did hear, I really liked. I thought he did. That was probably the best Trump speech. Like, Trump is no Winston Churchill. He is not going to send the English language to war. But he's certainly not based on his oratory skills. But for Trump, he stayed relatively on script. He was, what's the word I'm looking for? Eloquent, as far as he can be. And he listed his accomplishments. And the State of the Union is a lot of show. There's no doubt of that. But a couple of things he said, the one thing that really leaped out at me, and I have said this for the time that he's been in office, they hate him because he's pro-life. That's what the root of the hatred for Donald Trump really is. It's not about the borders. It's not about any of that stuff. Well, some of it is. But at its core, they hate him because he's pro-life. And when he stood in front of that audience with billions of people around the world watching, and he said, we have to get back to the fact where life is sacred and that we're all made in the image and likeness of God. And I'm paraphrasing what he said. That's not an exact quote.
Right.
But he made it very clear what his stand was, and there was no ambiguity. And I just cheered when I heard it, because most times politicians won't even mention it, never mind nail down a solid position on the topic.
Well, it's, my experience has been, and when I'm giving any advice to a politician who is pro-life, that's a shameless plug for, our consulting services. I generally, Nick, I generally tell them, stand up and say what you believe in. People who are going to vote against you because you are pro-life, we're going to vote against you anyway.
That's true.
You're not going to win them over because, I'm a conservative. I believe in smaller government, low taxes, minimal government interference in your life. Personal responsibility. I think global warming is a scam. I think that the guys that believe that the climate is changing because of you drive your car are flat earthers. I believe all that stuff. But I'm not going to do anything about abortion, okay? And all of a sudden, all those lefties out there are going to vote for you, you know. So look, if you're pro-life, you stand up and you say, I'm pro-life, this is why I'm pro-life. And this is the difference between politics in Canada and politics in the States. And, you know, the abortion issue is one of the things that you focus on that, you know, is a good illustration, but it's not just on the abortion issue. We've talked about this before, Nick. Conservative politicians, nominally conservative politicians, who are simply afraid to go out there and defend conservative principles.
Right.
And as a consequence of that, as a direct consequence of that, conservative principles don't get the kind of attention and defense that they ought to be getting in the public square. And so there are a lot of voters out there who think that conservatism is bad because the people who call themselves conservatives are so ashamed and so afraid of talking about what they believe in that there must be something wrong with it, or just as bad, or perhaps even more damaging, is the fact that so many voters out there never actually get to hear what conservative principles are, what conservatism is all about.
Because they're afraid of talking about it.
And because the people who call themselves conservatives are afraid to talk about these things openly. And I like to say, look, just talk about them, because just by talking about them, you're bringing them into the mainstream. The fact that some of these things are not mainstream in Canada is a direct consequence of the decision by conservative politicians to not talk openly, proudly about conservative principles. And the reality is, we live in a democracy. You're going to have, you know, there's an ebb and flow to the voting patterns and what the population wants or doesn't want. And so a lot of things go into how people are going to vote. And the truth of the matter is, whether you're a liberal, a socialist, a conservative, a progressive, whatever, you'll win elections and you're going to lose elections. So my argument is, you're going to lose as a conservative, and sometimes you're even going to lose because you're a conservative. But that's not a reason for you to stop being conservative. And if you're in this for the long game, if you're playing the long game here, okay, you have to stop damaging your brand by running away from your brand. So there's my rant for the evening.
Well,
and
it's a very good one. Because
say what you will about Donald Trump, he's not afraid to stand up. And the funny thing about it is, Donald Trump isn't even really deep down a conservative.
You know,
it's ironic that the guy who's probably, in terms of Republican politicians in the White House over the last 25 years, since Reagan anyway,
right?
Okay, he's probably the least conservative of Republican presidents, but he's the one that's been the least inhibited in talking about conservative principles.
Well, he also made a comment. He made several I thought were remarkable given the audience. The one was the assertion that the United States will never be a socialist country. There's a lot of people sitting in that room who vehemently want that not to be true.
Bernie Sanders, I don't know if you saw that. They focused the camera on Bernie Sanders.
Oh, he looked like he was ready to spit nails, because that's exactly what he wants. Anyway, Nancy Pelosi looked like somebody sitting on attack but not being able to say so, sitting behind him. And even when she did stand up, the applause out of her was never enthusiastic. Now, she's the head of the Democratic side of the House. She's the majority leader in the House. So she's not going to stand up and be a cheerleader for the guy. But if you're going to stand up, at least make an effort.
Right. I didn't think she looked that bad. I heard and read some commentary today about how bad Nancy Pelosi looked. But my sense was that she didn't look so bad.
Well, I'm probably being hard on her because I think she's about as smart as a bag full of hammers. So I'm being a little rough. But at the same time, there was a couple of, what were the comments? Rather than me tell you what I thought, were there any comments in that speech that stood out for you?
Well, I thought the whole thing was well delivered. I thought that I thought that Trump was his presentation was measured. I realize that for something as major as a State of the Union speech, there's a lot of input that goes into it. So, Donald Trump didn't sit there and write the whole speech. So I think he stayed on script, and I think that was a good thing. Probably the speech was probably more moderate than Donald Trump, the person, would have given if it was up to him.
Right.
And which is regrettable because I thought it really struck the right tone. Maybe for my taste in some areas, it sort of veered to the left a little bit in some things.
Too.
But on a lot of issues, it was to the right. He was strongly principled, and I thought overall it was probably the best performance, best Donald Trump performance that I've taken in. I can't say it's the best that he's given since he's been the president, but it certainly was amongst, if not the best, that I've seen since he became president.
Yeah, he certainly has. If anything, he's been able to polish his ability to be deliver without being overly antagonistic or abrasive.
Well, he could still be antagonistic and abrasive.
But it's not like day one of the presidency. It's not like his campaign. And I hesitate to use the word moderate.
No, I think he's grown into it.
Mature might be a better word.
He's grown into the position more. I still regret his tendency to, his proclivity to tweet.
Yeah, I know. I'm not sure they'll ever cure him with that.
No, but I will say this, okay? I saw an interview, I think it was on Fox News, with him, and the subject of him being, a little abrasive, a little in your face, especially on Twitter and social media, came up, and I think it was on Fox. And they were asking him about it. And his response actually was a good response. I have to tell you. He said, a lot of people, and I'm paraphrasing as well, a lot of people don't like it. And I'll even admit that I get myself into a little bit of difficulty from time to time. But this is me. This is me. You elected me for better or worse, for good or bad. And this is me. This is how I deal with things and operate. And I thought that was refreshingly honest. He didn't excuse it. He didn't run away from it. He owned it. He acknowledged that a lot of people don't like it. And then he said it, but this is me. This is the authentic Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I think that's what endears him to a lot of people. Now, other people, like let's not fool ourselves. There's a lot of people out there who simply hate everything he stands for. Hate him, and you know what? In a democracy, in a real democracy, that's okay. You don't have to like the leader. Like in Canada, there's millions of people who don't like our current leadership in any political party. They look at them all and go, bah, they're all up, pox on all their houses. And that is part of being in a democracy. When you can do that, when you don't have to worry about the cops knocking on your door at 3 o'clock in the morning and dragging you away, never to be seen again. I'm making the extreme case, but the bottom line is that you don't have to like, but you do have to accept in a democracy that whoever the democracy chooses as their leader is in fact the leader. And this is something that both in Canada and in the United States is very difficult for the losing side to do because they vehemently don't like. Like, look at Justin Trudeau as an example. Like, I'd take Trudeau over Trump in a heartbeat just because Donald Trump puts the United States ahead of everybody else. If that was the only reason, that's good enough, because Trudeau doesn't do that. He has no interest in Canada. He talks.
Now wait a minute. You've confused me. So you mean you'd take Trump over Trudeau?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you said you'd take Trudeau over Trump, I think.
Well, okay, let me clear that up.
Okay, just to be sure. Maybe you didn't, but I
over
thought
Trudeau
you did,
in a heartbeat, if for the only reason, everything else being equal, that Trump puts the United States first in everything. Trudeau, on the other side of the coin, almost never puts Canada first. He divides and conquers. We'll get into it after the break. There's this new indigenous language commissioner they want to bring on board. That does nothing but divide Canadians. That's not about he's working from the recommendations of the Reconciliation Commission, which is a joke to begin with. But there's all these divisions. He goes around talking about all the different things that bind us together, and then he tears us apart. And if you don't believe me, go talk to people in Alberta. There's all kinds of issues like that. So I'd take Trump over Trudeau any day for that reason alone.
Okay, and with that, I think we're going to go for our first break, Nick.
All right, let's do that. We'll be right back with more on the Combat Zone. Welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. He's Joe, I'm Nick, and we have a plethora of things to discuss. We were talking about the...
Wait. Hold the phone.
Okay.
A plethora.
Yeah.
A plethora. That's a great word. I love the word.
Plethora, yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard you use it before, Nick.
Probably because I don't know that I have. It is in my file box of things I can use.
It is in your vocabulary.
I extrapolated that for the show just tonight.
I don't know if you extrapolated it. But you definitely pulled it out of your language.
Extrapolated, that is not the right way to use the word extrapolate.
It's definitely not.
That's right. The word extrapolate, for those who don't know, means to take raw data and come to the correct conclusion.
No, it does not.
It's close.
Well, let's not get into that right now.
All right. Fine.
We're going to have to.
I'm going to use it.
We're going to have to do it. Yeah. Well, you can use it any way you want.
That's right.
Okay.
There's all kinds of words I use any way I want to.
The question is, what is the opposite of extrapolation?
Intrapolation.
Yeah, very close. Interpolation.
Interpolation. Okay.
That's it.
See, when you use words like that, you sometimes end up feeling like the turtle on the fence post.
Right. And we are in the process of elaborating.
Yes. And that is an old agrarian saying that means you have no idea. You're like a turtle on a fence post. You have no idea how you got there, no idea what you're doing, and no idea how you're going to get down.
So, Nick, this is a good time for us to remind our listeners that they can join us in the chat room. A little quiet in there tonight, man. I'm just, what's going on,
usually
man?
There's a pretty frenzied to and fro in there.
Okay, so anyway, chat room. Join us live in the chat room, guys. Have your say. Be as critical of Nick as you want to. To do that, all you have to do is click on the chat or talk bubble in the live player. You're probably listening on live online. So click on that, register if it asks you to register. That's to make sure you're a real live flesh and blood human being. You don't have to be alive. You just have to be a human being. Or you can actually call us toll free anywhere in North America as well. 844-415-2115. The number again, 844-415-2115. And that is my PSA public service announcement.
It is.
For the evening. Not my PSA test.
Oh, man. Now, before we get into the next topic, I'm not going to spend very long at this. I don't know about where our listeners live, but here in the nation's capital, we had quite a warm spell yesterday. And a lot of the subdivisions had lakes instead of roads. You'd have been better off with a 15-horse outboard motor and a 20-foot aluminum boat.
Well, I don't know about that, but I could tell you my garage is well and truly flooded.
Because your garage is down under the house on a slope.
Well, it's actually it's actually not supposed to be. It does slope down a little bit, but it's supposed to be level. But the problem is, I cannot, for the life of me, get rid of that snow or the ice in the laneway itself. And so the problem that I have is that as we've had these intermittent thaws, the water, instead of flowing out, flows into the garage.
Of course.
It accumulates there because it's got nowhere to drain because I don't have a garage drain.
You need a bilge pump.
It's in some sections it's deep enough that I darn well could use one.
I have no doubt.
Anyway, so and then it freezes. And so now the problem now is that, of course, my garage door won't close all the way.
That's right. You're going to have about a 2-3 inch gap there. But when we had a little family gathering here in the loft at Bunker B, where a bunch of the kids came, we had some grandkids, and it was chaos right up till just before showtime. But one of my daughter's fiance, a young man who's was coming over to join in the festivities, either took the wrong turn or ended up lost in the subdivision and ended up being more of a submarine than a car. And you could almost laugh because I could see him going up scope, flood 2, open outer doors, flood tubes 1 and 2. He'd have been more successful that way, but he got stuck. And we had to call CAA to give him a tug to get him out of the puddle. It was just ridiculous. So anyway, so much for global warming. Temperatures all over the map, and it has nothing to do with us. All right, now,
identity politics, Nick.
Let's
talk about identity politics.
That's where I'm going because you know me. I'm all about identity politics.
You know, I am not a big defender of English language rights. I think the whole language rights thing is just bunk. But I got to tell you, the way I feel today, I'm starting to feel that it's the English language that's become endangered. And not just, you know, I see some of the guys in the chat room have been making fun of our, you know, pointless little substance, big words, okay? But
I hadn't noticed. I'm just looking at them now.
But seriously, am I the only person that's just shaking my head at this proposal now? And you know, I know you mentioned about the indigenous language commissioner. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, just bear in mind that the problem isn't having a commissioner. The problem is what you're going to do with a commissioner. And you know, these are the first steps towards using federal tax dollars to promote the use and teaching of Aboriginal languages, which, by the way, I'm not opposed to teaching and working in these languages. I'm as a genuine conservative, I believe that if the children in the school and the community and the parents want to do whatever they want to do in the language they want to do it, that's okay with me. I think it's impractical, given the fact that we have a modern national economy and a global economy that operates more and more in English. So teaching your children English is a very important thing to helping them to become responsible, self-reliant citizens, to look after themselves, so to have a place in the world and in the economy. So I'm not saying that I think that parents should not teach their children English, but I am also saying that if they choose to send their children to a school that teaches only and they operate only in a particular indigenous language, that's their right. I don't interfere with that. I get it. Okay. But are we really going to go out of our way in this country and create now these silos where we're emphasizing and teaching people to not be the same? We're teaching them to be different. And you made a great point before he came on air tonight, Nick, about languages. And that is, if you really want to teach your children a particular language, speak it. And you know, I had a discussion with somebody years ago about the French language laws. And, you know, I pointed out to them that the real threat to French language in North America isn't English Canada, it's American TV, because that's what the kids watch. They watch American TV shows. Right. And as a subject that we ought to get into at some point in time in the future, not for tonight, but I'm just going to touch on it briefly to illustrate the point. So do we do the same thing in English Canada. You know, you flick on the CBC, that flagship, you know, icon of Canadian culture, only to be bombarded with American sitcoms. Okay, I don't get it. Okay, well, I do get it. That's the problem. Is I do get it. Everybody else at the CBC doesn't. But it's the same thing with the French language. I would tell people, look, if the language is in danger, if you really believe that, it's endangered not because the law doesn't protect it. It's endangered because you're not using it. Your kids are going out. They're watching American television on Canadian stations. They're building, look, the United States, we live right beside the United States, okay? We are dominated by American culture. We're not going to get away with it. And so you can pass all the laws you want. But here is the big one. And then I'll shut up because my mouth is getting dry here and I need a swig of something, okay? But here's the big one, Nick. You have to turn the radio and TV and cell phones and Walkmans and all this stuff off every evening and sit around the dinner table and have a family meal together and just talk. Just talk and listen to each other and get to know one another. And the benefits of that are just tremendous and not just in the language area. But this is the problem. People don't use these languages. And it really doesn't matter to me who's to blame. I don't care who's to blame.
Well, let me bring up to speed for those listening into the conversation of what we're talking about so they have some frame of reference. According to a piece in the Globe and Mail, the Liberal government introduced legislation on Tuesday aimed at protecting and promoting endangered indigenous languages, saying in the bill that years of colonialist laws caused their erosion. Now, that's paragraph 1. Let me read one more paragraph, and then I want to comment on some of this stuff. The legislation would create an Office of Indigenous Language Commissioner and respond to 3 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that include acknowledging that Indigenous rights include Indigenous language rights and enacting language laws that, among other things, preserve, revitalize, and provide funding for these initiatives. Now, some of the Inuit groups love it. Others are saying it doesn't go far enough. Okay, as you pointed out, if you want to protect your language, speak it. Teach it to your kids. I live not far from Wilno when I'm in the valley. Okay? Wilno is the first Polish settlement. It's the oldest Polish settlement in Canada, if not in North America.
Right.
Established around 1840, 1850, somewhere in there. There is no problem finding people who know how to speak Polish in that community because they take their culture seriously. To the best of my knowledge, they don't get a dime from any government agency of any kind. And yet they have Polish priests in their churches. They have an event in Combermere, which is just 45 minutes from my place, called Kashub Days, where they celebrate the Kashub Polish heritage, with a lot of Kashub Poles in our area. So you have they do it in their food. They do it. There's a whole culture there that's very rich and is added to the Canadian tapestry without ever having to go to the government to get a dime. Now, if the Poles can do it, and I'm not putting the Poles down, but I'm just saying that. Why can't anybody else do it? Well, a lot of other people do it. The Italians do the same thing. The Irish do the same thing. The Dutch, the French, yes. But, a lot of these different groups, I was going to say the Mongolians, I'm thinking of the Ukrainians out west, they all do the same thing. So why do we need to set this particular culture up above everybody else and promote them in a way nobody else gets access to? This, on top of all that, this is another level of government, of bureaucracy, where another way to spend money, win votes, all of that nonsense. This is nothing but partisan politics. Because if this guy turns out, if this language commissioner is anything like Graham Fraser used to be, he won't lift a finger to make sure, because Graham Fraser's job was to make sure both official languages were represented equally, and he couldn't care less about English, and the only time he ever responded was when something went wrong for French francophones. And that drove people crazy. So this is another event by Trudeau designed at its very heart to divide and conquer, not unite. Because if he cared about unity within the country, he'd say, are you crazy? We have enough people out here who care about their culture, that their culture will live or die as they want it to, not by government mandate or fiat. And that's my little rant on it.
No, I agree with you. For the most part, I agree with you.
It just drives me mad.
I've never jumped into this whole, English is an endangered species, an endangered language kind of attitude that some people have. But
and it would never will be. But there's a lot of people trying.
But I hear you, and that of course is the problem. The problem is if whatever the cause. And by the way, I hate it. I hate it when I hear people talking about Canada's colonial past.
Oh, that was a point I wanted to get into too. Go ahead.
It's true. It's true. Canada has a colonial past.
That's right.
By the way, the colonial past is not French, or it's not English. It's not just English, it's French. So, when you promote French, you're promoting colonialism. But I digress.
Yes.
Okay?
But let me deal with that colonialism for a minute.
Okay, go ahead. You go ahead.
Let's look at it for what it is. English colonialism, imperialism, give it whatever ism you want, is responsible for every democracy in the world. The vast majority of them. Okay, look at Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Canada, wherever the British Crown went, democracy, India's another one, followed in its wake. Now, sometimes it wasn't clean and it wasn't pretty. I'm not painting the British Crown as some kind of saint, but they left behind the seeds that germinated into the world's great democracies. And that includes Canada. Now, imagine for a minute, and I'm going to get in huge trouble for saying this, but I don't care. What if the Western Europeans had stayed home and not found North America, or had found it and said, nah, it ain't worth it, and went back to Europe? What kind of culture would be here? What kind of living condition? I can tell you exactly what it would be. The same as they were 500 years ago. Because those people had 10,000 years. And I'm putting them down. I'm just stating the facts. Okay? But when Columbus got here, or when Jacques Cartier got here, or you pick the explorer, they were a Stone Age technology. Average lifespan was about 40 years. A lot of them died of either exposure or internal air pollution from burning smoke inside of tents, or were killed off in war or by disease. Okay? So they were living, they were Stone Age technology. They hadn't even invented the wheel. Now, I'm not going to say everything was rosy the moment that Cartier or Columbus or whoever showed up. There was a long, rough road, and they did get some pretty bum deals. Nobody's denying that. But they're a lot better off now with us here than they would have been had we stayed home. Because they are living in indoor plumbing, indoor houses with houses with central air with heating and indoor plumbing. And they weren't living that way 500 years ago when we showed up. And there was no indication to show they would have done that on their own.
Okay. Well, all I'll say to that is that idle speculation. I don't know what the world would have been like without colonialism. But I will say this. I agree with you that the British colonialism was not pretty in certain circumstances. But on balance, I think that it left societies better off than they would otherwise have been.
In a nutshell, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you on that, but that's not the point I wanted to make. The point I wanted to make was I wasn't there.
That's also true.
I wasn't there, okay? I am not guilty of anything that I am being punished for. I'm not guilty. You're not guilty. Newsflash, Prime Minister Trudeau, you're not guilty either. So bad things were done. Guess what? Before colonists came to this land, bad things were being done by Indigenous peoples to Indigenous peoples. Like this was the human condition, and it still is. And so I guess what I'm saying is stop asking me and my children to correct the mistakes, rightly or wrongly, that were committed 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago. Stop it already. It's not right. Justice, it's not just. You don't, and you know, look, there are a lot of people that are going to disagree with you and I on this, okay, Nick? I mean, I could see the emails coming now, okay? If not the human rights complaints. And by the way, you all know where to reach us if you want to file a human rights complaint against us. Okay, please do, because we need.
We're at 123 Spruce and Juice,
and we'd love to have the opportunity to raise money for ourselves on that. Okay, you know, we've learned from the best, Ezra Levant. But
how did I know you were going to say that?
Yeah, no, Ezra's a good guy. We like Ezra. In case anyone was thinking that we were saying anything negative about him, because we really weren't. Where was I?
Human rights.
You can't. Yeah, that was another one of those digressions.
Oh, okay.
The point is, Nick, that it's life goes on. Okay, and this is what I wanted to say. Okay, you know, in my community, the Jewish community. Okay, my community is only just really emerging from the Holocaust, okay? And, okay, there were reparations, et cetera, but you don't see the kind of what's the word I'm looking for? You know, can I say whining? Is that too harsh, Nick? Coming from the Jewish community with respect to, you know, the Holocaust, as you hear from people who never even experienced the kinds of things that we're being punished for. Okay, Chinese community. We're going to apologize to the Chinese community for how badly they were treated 120 years ago. Nobody's alive.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that.
I mean, at some point in time, it just becomes absurd.
Well, it becomes history. But to me, there's a very clear line. First of all, there is a time and place for a government to apologize for policies of the past. But it's a very simple test. Is anyone alive, who's left alive, who is affected negatively by those policies, and is anyone left alive who enacted those policies? As long as the answer to those two questions is yes. Like when Harper apologized to the Chinese about a head tax, some of the people who suffered under that policy were still alive at the time. So it made sense to apologize because the people who were wronged deserved that apology. So as long as those two conditions are met, then absolutely, if the government's done something that is egregious and demands because remember, when the prime minister apologizing, he's not, unless he's apologizing for his own actions, when he gets up and says to a particular group, okay, you've got, Canada apologizes for XYZ. He's not apologizing just for him or his party. He's apologizing for every Canadian, as if somehow we're all guilty. Now, like I said, if it's let's say you know who should be apologized to by the government today is the which was the ship that Mackenzie turned back of Jewish Holocaust. They were fleeing
the St. Louis.
The St. Louis,
right?
The SS St. Louis. We should apologize for that, unless it's already been done.
It was just done.
Okay,
it was just done.
But that's an example of an apology that we should have made much earlier, because of the consequences of that decision. But
Nick, going back to the Chinese, okay, and I don't bear anybody any ill will here, okay. I'm not defending the actions of the Canadian government 120 years ago, but not only was I not there, but my family wasn't even here.
Yeah.
And Nick, your family wasn't even here, okay, or maybe some branches of it were at some point. The point is, we're not responsible. So, look, even if you want to go through the motions of an apology because you feel it's the right thing to do, that's fine. But then we get into this thing where we're actually having to compensate and restore things that don't exist anymore. for better or for worse, rightly or wrongly, okay? And to ask me and to ask my children and to ask my grandchildren to pay out of their pockets for something that they not only did they not do, but their ancestors didn't do because they weren't even living here in the first place.
There's another apology that needs to be made. And
I'm waiting for someone to apologize to me.
No, but I'm being
for
serious.
Something.
I think the apology that's owed by the Canadian government is to the widow of that medic, Mrs. Spears, for the $10.6 million we gave Cotter. That's an apology that is well deserved.
See, I knew you were going to get Omar Cotter into this conversation somehow.
He's in Alberta and he wants to be released from his indefinite sentence. And my answer is sure, we'll release him as long as he agrees to live on Hans Island. Now, for those of you who don't know where Hans Island is, it's a tiny little rock about 2 square miles up there between Ellesmere and Greenland, north of the Arctic Circle.
I know. This
very
is
friendly place.
And this is a flashpoint. This island is a flashpoint, and if we are going to go to war with anyone, it will be Denmark over that rock.
Yeah, and you know what? If Omar Cotter agrees to live there, then we'll let Denmark have it. He can have him. This guy is such a disgusting human being. I have no time for him. And for him to expect us to let him walk around free, sorry. But you know what? With this particular government, I am not convinced it won't happen.
Well, I think this is a good time to point out that the opinions expressed on this show
are totally mine.
Do not necessarily reflect the opinions of all of those even peripherally involved with the combat zone. Oh dear.
I'm sorry, but I just have very strong opinions.
No, I know you do, Nick, and the whole thing, this whole idea of resurrecting dead languages because of the residential schools is, I'm very much opposed to it, and I think that people can oppose it without defending, what went on in residential schools or the whole residential school policy. And by the way, along with all of this is the proposal to create a new Truth and Reconciliation. Ready? Get ready for it.
I'm listening.
Statutory holiday.
Oh, that. I forgot all about that.
You totally forgot about that.
Bring that up.
Okay.
Like we need another holiday.
Yeah. Well, our public servants are worked to the bone. You know what they say, right? Work your fingers to the bone. What do you get?
Time off.
Bony fingers.
That's right. I know the song. Although, you know why government bureaucrats don't look out the window in the morning?
You're going to tell us, Nick. You're going to tell us.
Because then they'd have nothing to do in the afternoon.
Okay, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are going for another break. We will catch you in a few minutes. Okay, welcome back into the Combat Zone. I am Joe. He is Nick. Brendan Moss. Okay, we had too much fun in that last segment.
He was looking at me like a beautiful owl. I had no idea.
I know. I was trying to think. What do I want to say here? I almost got into where the enemy has only 4 things to say.
We just say that at the top of the show.
I know. Yeah. Abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and we surrender.
He's getting it. He's getting
I know, but
better.
I just got it. I spent too much time setting up this the studio when before we went on, and we were running out of time. And actually, I think we started maybe a minute later than I wanted to.
Yeah, well, but I've noticed something about you. You're like a 3-legged plow horse. You try really hard, and slowly over time, you get better.
A 3-legged plow horse.
That's right.
Thank you, Nick, for that compliment. I appreciate it. Okay, listen, talking about really stupid people, I don't know, we're because we were debating when we were going to do our stupid our stupid people segment. Okay,
and believe me. Okay.
Okay, hang on just a second. Okay. Let's just do this now. Stupid people
doing really stupid things.
Okay. Now.
Okay, listen, we have to do Venezuela as part of this thing, okay?
Well, we can lump it all in because
let's lump it all in.
All right, because both candidates, we've got about 4 or 5 different candidates for this segment. Okay, we have the head of 3 different Canadian unions, and we've got the Attorney General and the Governor of the state of Virginia. Now, they're not all guilty of the same kind of stupidity or the same stupid event.
Okay. You see, we should have organized this before we went live. Okay, I want to talk about Canadian union leaders.
All right.
Supporting the dictator in Venezuela.
And I just happen to have the story right here. Go ahead.
Imagine that, right?
Imagine that.
So as you know, there was an election a little while ago in Venezuela. Venezuela has been run into the ground. The people in Venezuela, business, commercial activity, the economy has ground to a halt. The result of socialism in Venezuela, originally instituted under Hugo Chavez, that great friend of Cuba and Iran.
That's right.
Okay. Castro's Cuba, not the hopefully emerging new modern Cuba.
What's his name? His brother?
Castro.
Yeah, I know that first name.
The Castro boys.
The Castro boys. Mrs. Castro's little boys.
Yeah, no, I think that things are going to improve in Cuba. I think they have a long way to go still. But Venezuela totally going the different direction. Chavez dies of a cancer, I think he had. Yep. We have an election, and we have a new dictator elected, quote unquote, by the name of Nicolas Maduro. And the whole world, the whole democratic world, is against this guy. And there's an incipient revolution against him in Venezuela, and our government, like other democratic governments around the world, are basically pressuring this dictator to leave office and allow the real opposition, the democratically selected pro-freedom, pro-free enterprise party to take control. Now, you can quibble with that all you want, but down all of a sudden, our national union leaders in Canada, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, CUPW, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, CUPE, the head of the Canadian Labour Congress, are all now complaining because our government has decided to recognize the opposition leader as the legitimate leader of Venezuela.
Now, just so people...
And they're supporting this dictator. Now, how crazy is that?
Well, first of all, it just shows that they're socialistic roots. Unions have long since been about a lot of things, but not about the rank and file. They've been infiltrated, but for years, by socialists/communists, and this is further evidence of that. The head of CUPE, or CUPW, is a guy called Mike Palachek. CUPE is headed by Mark Hancock. The CLC is Hassan Youssef. He's the president. And CUPW by Mike Palance. And that's the leadership of the major unions that are against Canada's stand against a dictator. Now, what's really funny is when you read the story from the CBC, no less, here's just one paragraph. CLC President Hassan Youssef is also the president of the Trade Confederation of the Americas, which includes the labor movement in South America. He said he finds the international endorsement of Guaido problematic, but his main concern is the prospect of military intervention, which the only country in all of them who's even mentioned the military option are the Americans, and I don't think they're very serious about it. But Here, I'm trying to find the right paragraph. I had it earlier. Said the protesters wanted to send a message that Canada should not interfere in a foreign democracy. Okay, that was said by the Mike Palachuk, the head of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers.
Unless that democracy is Israel, of course.
Yeah.
But I once again, I digress.
Yes, you do. But you make a brilliant point. But, Mike, Venezuela is not a democracy. It hasn't been in 20 years. Where have you been? What is your definition of the word? Because it's not a democracy. You had one dictator help get another one elected by using a democratic tool, okay, the vote, but it was so malign and so twisted that every democratic country in the world condemned that election. He suspended their constitution to get this done. So now when you have Rodrigo come along, who is the as close to a legitimate leader as you can get, the union says, "Oh no, man, we don't like this," and they do it because that's what the NDP position was. Now Jagmeet Singh, the head of the union of the federal NDP, is flip flopping all over the place. He's like a fish on a deck on a fishing boat. One moment he's one side up, the next moment he's the next side up, other side up. So these guys. But the part that I think that's really important here, and I'll quit ranting in a second, let you get in, is the rank and file are being their dollars. Because there's no way you can convince me that the majority of the rank and file of these unions supports a socialist dictator in the country of Venezuela. I'm sorry, I just don't believe it. I think this is the leadership. I think they're using union dues in a way that the vast majority of these people who make up their unions would never agree to if they had an option.
Well, here's the funny thing, okay, if you want to call it funny. The whole premise, the whole argument for what we call in this country the RAND formula, which is essentially, it was a decision by the courts. Not by the courts, it was an arbitration decision back, I think, in 1946 or 1947, in the settlement of a strike between one of the auto manufacturers, I believe it was Ford, and the workers, and it was the arbitrator was a fellow by the name of Rand, who was a judge at the time, and he came up with this idea that even if you were not a member of the union, you still had to pay union dues,
right? Because
if you were working in that place, you were benefiting from the activity of the union. So, and I don't agree with compulsory union dues or certainly not compulsory union membership, but I will concede that there is an element of logic to that argument. But, and here's the big but. Somebody please explain to me how workers in Canada, members of CUPE, members of CUPW, members of the Canadian Labour Congress, benefit from the activities of their leaders who are supporting, and their salaries are being paid by these union dues, they're supporting. Whether you agree with them on the points that they're making or not, they are supporting these guys in a foreign country, a dictatorship in a foreign country.
Right.
But even if it wasn't a dictatorship, they're still supporting and getting involved in this foreign country. Explain to me how the workers here in Canada benefit from that activity, which is the only justification for compulsory union dues, even if you're not a member of the union.
Well, one of the things I've always had a challenge with unions is the idea of compulsory union dues. Like when I drove for Wolverine Freight down in Windsor, they had a union shop. And for me to work there, at the time, this is going back into the early, mid-'90s, the union dues for me, because we weren't making scads of money as a truck driver, but I think it was $40 a month. And I got nothing for that $40 a month. They said, well, if you ever get in trouble, the union represents you. Well, the vast majority of membership don't get into trouble. And, in other words, if the union has so many benefits to it, sell me on the idea. Let me choose for myself. If I tick off the box and sign a form that says I want to be a member of this union, fine. Then I owe you $40 a month. But if you compel me to, the word I come up with is called I want to use the word slavery, but that might be a little strong because you can always quit. Slavery, you're not given that option. But forced in servitude or something along that line. There's
indentured servitude.
Yeah, indentured servitude. That's the phrase I want. The point is, how is somebody supposed to exercise any form of control over where their money goes? I mean, when you give to charity, you choose which charity you want to give to.
Right.
Right? If you belong to an association, or no matter what it is, you choose to support that through your membership fees.
Right.
For those who want to support the combat zone, they do that by sending us a donation. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I had to slip that in there.
Yeah. But all joking aside, you're making a very good point.
Yeah. So why should this has been one of the big problems I've had, and the only time you ever see the union do anything is when they're protecting people who should have been fired.
Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. This is not. I don't want this to turn into a union bashing segment.
I'm just stating what I see as the fact.
I hear you. Okay. I think the more important thing for Canadians to know is how out of step we are in this country when it comes to union laws and labor laws from the rest of the world. Because Canada, if you go to left-wing socialist European Union, okay, you cannot be number one, you cannot be forced to join a union. You cannot be forced to join a union as a condition of employment. Number one. Number two, you can be forced to pay union dues, but in a case where union dues are compulsory, the union must provide a mechanism. The dues that are levied on a compulsory basis can only be used to benefit the workers and members of that union. If the union wants to be involved in anything else, social justice issues, protesting, potential alleged military intervention in South America, saving, the turtles with straws in their noses or whatever, okay? Right. Whatever the cause is, if it's not directly benefiting the workers, the members of that union, the union has to provide a mechanism whereby members can opt out of contributing to those causes. So that can happen in one of two ways. You either do a collection where people donate above and beyond their dues for that cause, or you determine the percentage of the dues that you've collected that goes towards that cause, and you must communicate with all of your union members and give them the opportunity to opt out, at which time you reimburse them that percentage.
Yep.
Now that's left-wing, radical socialist Europe.
Well,
is way ahead of us when it comes to how you deal with organized labor.
Well, you know something? If organized labor in Canada wanted to interfere and meddle with internal affairs of other countries and actually do some good, why aren't they protesting in Bangladesh about the condition of the factories over there? Bangladesh is where we were 100 years ago, when unions were necessary, when they actually put labor, the people who were working in the factories during the Industrial Revolution, at the front of their game. That's what they were all about, was getting rid of child labor laws, making the place safe to work in.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you. Don't buy it. I do not buy it at all. There are no safety regulations that have come about through union activism. All the things with regards to child labor, workplace safety, worker training, all of these things have come about when there have been problems on the job, fire, overcrowding, health and safety issues, and when the government of the day strike some sort of a commission, an inquiry, could be an coroner's report. Recommendations are made, and then they are implemented or imposed legislatively or through regulation. It is a myth that unions have been on the forefront of modernization and health and safety, okay? Now, these days, they're involved in these issues, but the regulations for health and safety that unions generally promote today don't really increase the health and safety of the workers. What they are ways of blocking non-union shops from working in those places, okay? So they're really about job protection. Now, I will grant you that unions have been fairly effective, I think, on a case-by-case basis in job protection, in negotiating job protection, and in negotiating benefits and higher salaries. I'll grant you that, but I will not grant that sweatshops were banned because of union activity.
I get what you're saying, and all right, I'll buy that.
Okay.
But today, if you were to go to the country of Bangladesh, they are not going to pass any law. They are not going to make any reform. First of all, the government is way too corrupt. There's too many people to pay off. Everybody's got their hand out for a little slice of the pie. It's a third world country. But if they wanted the union to actually make a difference, then why don't they go to Bangladesh and start protesting on behalf of the people working in those plants?
Well, of course, you know what the real problem is in Bangladesh. They kicked the British out too soon.
Obviously. But my point is they protest Venezuela, okay, that we're interfering in the internal affairs of a foreign state. They don't have any problem interfering when it suits them. So either do it when you can actually do some good, or shut up and sit down, is really what I'm saying.
And with that,
we forgot the other half.
No, we didn't forget, because I have this all planned out in my mind, Nick. We should have storyboarded this before, okay? Okay, that's for all of you guys who don't understand how these things work, okay? That's internal jargon talk for us podcasters, okay?
That's right.
We podcasters, No, it's because we have to talk about these guys in two different contexts. And one of them is kind of silly, so let's finish up this segment, and then we'll get into the serious stuff that the same people are involved in, okay? So you lead off, Nick. We're going to talk. Right. Let's talk about.
You want to talk about the state of Virginia?
The state of Virginia. Well, yeah, but let's talk. Let's talk about this yearbook business. Is that what you want?
That comes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that.
Okay. So I don't have the story open in front of me, but I've got a few notes on it. And basically, the governor of the state of Virginia was found, and they went back to his law school yearbook. So he's by then probably in his late teens, or I'd be in his early 20s if he's in law school. All right, not exactly what you call a period in your life where you have reached the zenith of wisdom.
Yeah, Ralph Natham, right?
Yeah, Governor Ralph Natham, yep. Anyway, and in this photo, in his yearbook, he is wearing he's blacked out his face. They call it wearing a black face. It's a derogatory thing you do about black people. In the days of vaudeville, it was quite common to see a white actor put on a blackface and do a
black makeup to make them look black.
Black makeup would make them look like black, except their eyes. They're all white.
Right.
Anyway, the point was that he did this. Now, when you're 20 years old, I'm cutting the guy a little bit of slack here. You're not exactly a rocket scientist. You don't know. 10 years ago, you were 12. You don't know nothing yet about the world. So he went and did this, and somebody has recently pointed it out.
Yeah, but Nick, When I was 21 years old, I was serving on a destroyer.
Yeah,
I knew
know,
something
so
about
was
the
I,
world.
but-
I just wanted to get that off.
Yeah, I'm trying to give the guy a little bit of rope here.
Okay, but don't give him too much rope.
No, because now the axe comes down. He comes out, and first of all, he admits that it's him in the photo. Then the next day he comes out and says, wait, no, that's not me. But I did wear a blackface in another setting. Now, first of all, it's either you or it's not. If you do this, it's not something you're going to forget. Like I was in the play The Sound of Music. I was in the play The Anne of Green Gables. And what was the third one? Anne of Green Gables, Sound of Music. I forget what the third one was. No, I was supposed to be in the third one, but I graduated high school. I remember those plays.
You played in The Sound of Music?
I was Ralph Gruber.
Get lost,
Lisa's
really?
boyfriend.
Do you know that there's a joke in that?
Yeah.
So what you're telling me is that you were like the Nazi,
That's right.
the true believer.
I was the blonde-haired Nazi.
It's my wife's favorite movie.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was. I like the play ending for Ralph, not Ralph, better in the play than in the movie. In the movie, he blows the whistle on them. In the play, he lets them go. So he's a little better guy in Sound of Music. But I was in Anne of Green Gables as Tommy Sloan, and I had the best-looking girlfriend on the stage. She was, anyway, I'm not going there. But the bottom line is that I remember these things quite clearly. Your high school years, those years, they stick with you. So he knew whether it was him or not. He completely dropped the football. He should have just said, if he'd have been smart, he'd have come out and owned it and said, yes, that was me. It was a stupid thing to do. I regret it. I'm sorry. Move on. To make matters worse, the next day or the day after, a gentleman by the name of Mark Herring. Now, if you don't know who that is, that's the Attorney General, the top lawyer in the state of Virginia. He comes out and said, well, I wore a blackface. What? What are you doing? You know, and just unless somebody accuses you of it, when they accuse you of it, own it. But if they don't, shut up.
I have to tell you, Nick, I don't get the outrage. I mean, I don't get. Let me rephrase that. I don't get the retroactive outrage. These were people goofing around 30 years ago, and at a time when, or 30 or more years ago, at a time when this kind of thing was, I don't necessarily want to say acceptable, but it was certainly not as considered as reprehensible as it is today. And look, they used to, as you say, they used to do this in vaudeville.
Yep.
And they used to do it. There were movies where they did this. Mm-hmm. Popular movies. Nothing comes to mind exactly, but I know that this was not a normal thing. But it was a kind of a joke. And I understand if people are offended by it. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying a little bit of perspective and a little bit of context.
It is over the top. There's no doubt about it. These gentlemen are guilty of far greater sins in my book than whether they wore black shoe polish.
But I just want to say that I actually, you're making fun or you're criticizing the Attorney General. I actually am applauding him because what he's doing, he's going, yeah, hey, I did that. Okay, before you guys start accusing me. I just want you to know I did that, okay? And part of me is going, I kind of think I respect that. Okay,
well,
it's not saying
if you're gonna get all bent out of shape and outraged, and that's the royal you, then get mad at the governor, Ralph Northam, for his latest abortion law.
Well, let's hold off till after the break because I want to get into that. I think that's really important.
Yes, because that's what I was referring to. That's a much greater sin than whether he put black shoe polish on his face 30 years ago.
Okay, so we're gonna go for a break, Nick, and we'll get into that when we get back.
All right. back to the Combat Zone, folks. I'm Nick. He's Joseph, and we have a whole host of things still left on the discussion docket. And I'm curious. I hope we get to this story. I didn't mention it to Joseph yet, so if we don't have time to get to it this week, maybe we'll squeeze it in next week. But here in Ottawa, the community across the river in Quebec is called Gatineau, for those not in the Ottawa area. And they have a counselor by the name of Natalie Lemieux who wonders if the world really is round. Okay. So that one, it wasn't quite up to...
That's what happens, Nick, when you can buy beer at your local dépanneur.
Yeah, well, okay. But anyway, I just thought it was funny because, well, how do we know the world's really round? Well, I don't know. We could look at it from the space station. That might give it away. Anyway, so I don't want to go down that road right now. We have other things to get into.
So we were talking about the governor of New York.
Yes.
No, the governor of Virginia.
Virginia.
In the last segment. We were making fun of this whole blackface controversy and that. But, while all of that has been raging, there's been another development in Virginia and also in the state of New York under Governor Cuomo, where they both states have passed legislation liberalizing, and I use that term loosely, abortion laws, where they're now essentially allowing abortion in both of these states, up to and including the actual moment of delivery, which puts them pretty much on par with abortion law here, or abortion non-law here in Canada, where it is legal to kill a baby up until the point, literally, where the last foot, leaves the mother's birth canal. It's possible it's legal, I should say, to abort the baby, which, for all intents and purposes means killing the baby in the act of being born. So that now is legal in the state of Virginia and in the state of New York. And the interesting thing about the governor in Virginia, aside from all of the blackface stuff that he's been involved in, is he was recently interviewed on the radio where he was asked about these new laws, and he explained that under the new law, it was possible that if the baby was delivered and was alive, that you could make the baby comfortable and essentially let the baby die. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but it was words to that effect. Now, in reality, in fairness, that's actually not what the law is, but it's interesting that the governor was saying that that's the way the law is. And then, of course, everybody was outraged by it, so his public relations, his communications people quickly walked that back and said, no, the governor's comments were misconstrued. And I always like that. It's sort of like I misspoke when I said, this new law allows you to kill babies after they're born. But I misspoke. So, which in itself, you could be one of those, qualifies for the stupid comments or stupid politicians
we had plenty
or whatever.
Of candidates for that recently. I think this is so morally reprehensible. I can't look. I'm rabidly pro-life. I believe in from conception to natural death, and I make no bones or apologies for that.
Well, you shouldn't because Nick,
stating my case.
If you're going to look for an objective standard, the objective standard, the scientific standard of where life begins, okay, that's a biological question.
Right.
It's not a philosophical question of when does a human being become self-aware, and is that the essence of being human, okay? Which would be sort of like the Peter Singer bioethicist position to take. And by the way, that is, sanctions is his standard. So Peter Singer, okay, at Yale University, argues, he's an ethicist, okay? An ethicist at Yale University argues that infanticide should be legal because children soon after birth have no self-awareness, okay? And so that is the essence for him of being human. So he makes an argument that not only is abortion morally acceptable, but infanticide would be morally acceptable under those conditions as well. But the point you're making about conception, if you're going to look for an objective, okay, not a subjective philosophical argument, but an objective scientific point where life begins, the only place that you can say it begins is a conception.
That's been my argument for years.
So it is a moral argument, but it's more than a moral argument. It's the scientific argument.
Because if any time past conception, you could be wrong.
And here's the thing, when you talk about late-term or partial birth abortion, and that's what we're really talking about now in New York State and in Virginia.
Right.
Now partial birth abortion is legal there. And okay, for those of you who are listening, even if you are not anti-abortion, okay, most Canadians, virtually all Canadians, okay, do not know that partial birth abortion is legal in this country. And my argument would be from a scientific point of view, there is no biological difference. There is no cognitive difference between a child 1 week or 1 hour before being born or 1 hour after being born. And yet we try to make that distinction in law, where you can kill the child 1 hour before he or she is born, but it's not legal to kill the child 1 hour after. And there is no scientific basis for that whatsoever. That is a purely ideological position to take.
I find it so hard to get. It's because set the number of children I have aside. There's an innocence that I long for, that we all used to have when we were young, that I see in the eyes of children. And to think that there are people out there who would extinguish that innocence for the sake of nothing more than convenience. Now, I'm being broad-brushed. I understand that I'm not trying to trivialize the kind of suffering that some women go through during pregnancy, especially an unwanted one. I get that. That's no excuse to abort, but I'm sympathetic to that line of thinking. But at the same time, they say, well, it's going to screw up my life for the next 20 years. Yes, but if you abort the child, you will permanently screw up their life forever. So 20 years or forever, which is worse. You will recover from pregnancy, and the child will go on and have its own life, and you will get, if you don't think that raising a child is fulfilling in and of itself, then you will get your life back 20 years from now. Well, I'm only 18, so that only makes you 38. Are you old at 38? Did your life end at 38? No. It's this kind of stuff. I get so angry when I think about this stuff that most of the time I avoid the topic.
Yeah. Well, people, of course, when they're younger, they don't have the perspective, the appreciation that, 38 years old is by no stretch of the imagination life over, okay? And it's the culture that we live in now as well. It doesn't respect life. It doesn't respect the sanctity of life, the inherent value of life that's inviolable, simply because it is human life.
Well,
and it's the real tragedy, the real irony of all of this, Nick, is that so many people become so exercised. I was joking earlier on about straws and turtles' noses, okay?
Right.
The reality is that people care more for the comfort of turtles than they do for the life of these children.
I think one of the best stories I've ever heard to demonstrate this, and this is a number of years old now, this is not new, but there was a young woman who was a mother of 2 children jogging out on the western coast of the United States. I forget what state it was in. I'll say Washington because who knows. It doesn't really matter. She was killed by a mountain lion. So, of course, the authorities went out and shot the mountain lion. Found out it was a lioness, and she had 2 cubs. So they set up fundraising for the children left behind by the mother and another fund for the 2 cubs. And for every dollar they raised for the children left behind by this predatory attack by the cougar who killed their mother, for every dollar that was raised for the two little kids, let me rephrase that, they raised $10 for the cubs of the lioness. I'm sorry, that is disordered priorities. Like, I love animals as much as anybody else, but there's not an animal on the planet that's worth a single human life. And I would, if it meant saving somebody's life, I would actually kill every animal on my farm to save that life if it was the only option. And it's not that I don't love my animals. It's that I love human life more. And that's the distinction we've lost. And when you look at the way people treat their animals, they treat them better than they treat their neighbors. Now, mind you, sometimes the neighbors deserve it, but they're still human beings. Fluffy the dog is not a human being. And while I understand that in many cases, Fluffy the dog is the child that, let's say, a childless couple never had. Maybe they couldn't have children. I'm not condemning them for having a dog, but I'm sorry, it's still just a dog. And people need to understand that, and we need to start teaching it again, because too many times have we seen it where animals come before people, and that is morally wrong.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Let's move on to the next topic, because there's still some interesting ones here. First of all, there is Trudeau has been accused of saying, and it's only 10 seconds long, but there's a YouTube clip of Trudeau saying, if you make $11,000 a year, you don't pay any income tax. And Andrew Scheer is mocking him for that. Our colleague Brian Lilly is mocking him for that. But they're wrong. In this particular instance, Justin Trudeau is right. Anybody who makes $11,000 a year pays no income tax.
Federal income tax,
right.
Anyway.
Right.
Okay. I don't think they pay provincial income tax either, but I know for sure they don't pay federal income tax.
Well, the reason they don't is they still submit the T4. They still submit, they may have to, but they get it all back. What I'm saying is they get it all back in the form of a rebate.
Right. It's $11,000 is less than your personal claim.
Right.
And if it's less than your personal claim, then you don't pay income tax.
So he's right.
He's right. If that's the case, I'm not familiar with this. I'm not familiar with this debate.
Right. Well, they're saying,
but if this is what they're saying, then Trudeau is right and they're wrong.
And what I'm saying is that when I pointed that out on Twitter, somebody came along and said, "Well, I guess you've never heard of the HST, GST, and this tax." I said,
that's
no.
not income tax.
That's exactly my point. We're not talking about taxes in general. We're talking about personal income tax.
Right.
And he, as much as I hate to say it, and believe me, it's like bile in my throat to admit that Trudeau was right about something. He's right about this. We don't, for that income level, you don't pay income taxes. Now, conversely, Austin Matthews of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who beat Ottawa tonight 5-4, thank you very much, Austin, just signed a contract for $11.4 million a year for the next 5 years. Now, I'm not going to get into the minutia of his contract because I'm not familiar enough with the way professional hockey players' contracts are negotiated. But I do know this: of the $11 million, if he paid all of that if he was paid all of that in Canada as a salary, he would pay 53.53% of his income. Now, people out there, well, so what? He still got another $5.5 million. No, that's not the point. That is a hugely unfair amount of money for the government to reach into somebody's pocket and take. Austin Matthews has worked his butt off to get where he is. And if the Toronto Maple Leafs figure he's worth that kind of money, the state should have nothing to say about how much he takes home, other than, like, I'm getting into my income tax rant, but a flat tax is, I think, the most fair. That way, no matter how much you make, we all pay the same rate. And that's an argument for another day. But we have this really screwed up idea of what's taxes, as if fairness had anything to do with it. If it was fair, we'd all pay the same rate, but we don't. It's like you stand in line at a movie theater, and based on how much you make determines how much you're going to pay to get in to see the movie. If a guy's worth $1 million, he's going to pay $1,000. If a guy is, barely scraping by in the street, he might get in for free. Is that fair? Because you're paying for the same product. Why should one guy pay $1,000 and the other guy pay next to nothing?
Well, you're not going to get an argument from me.
No, I wasn't really expecting it.
We have graduated income tax in this country, and that has been deemed to be the fair way of doing income tax. But it's important to know that even those people that even if we had a flat tax and everybody was paying the same percentage of income tax, the people who have more money pay more taxes because they're going to presumably spend that money. So if they've bought a house and they're living in an expensive house in an expensive, exclusive neighborhood, they're paying higher property taxes. They're paying, on their purchases, they're paying sales taxes. And if their purchases are more expensive because they're buying higher-end cars, higher-end furniture, etc., they're paying a larger percentage of their income into taxes. But it's important to understand that everybody pays taxes.
Yeah,
there's nobody who doesn't pay taxes. The guy who's begging on the street and gets somebody, you give him a toonie, and he goes to the local Tim Hortons and buys a coffee for $1.40 or whatever. He's paying taxes on that coffee, and so everybody pays taxes. But you are quite right, Nick. There is a difference between income tax and if you're earning only $11,000, if that's your income for the year, you are not going to pay federal income tax. Right. It's not going to happen. And interestingly enough, if you go to the United States, I don't know what the percentage here is in Canada, but in the United States, only about roughly 50% of Americans pay federal income tax, which is, when you think about it, is problematic because there is no federal sales tax in the United States. So half of the voters, statistically speaking, approximately half of the voters in the United States vote for a government, that they never actually pay for, and they're voting to get benefits from that government. So it's kind of a screwy situation. Used to be that there was a property or minimum income qualification,
right,
where and I'm not advocating for this, I'm just saying historically, where you had to have a certain amount of income or have a certain amount of wealth before you actually were entitled to vote. Or you had to have, at one point in time, you had to actually own a certain amount of property before you could vote.
Well, originally, it was landowners.
Right, it was landowners.
And that was true in Canada, too. Like, right. The rules to become a member of the Senate in the original format was that you had to own, let's say, 1,000 acres of land. You had to have a certain
or whatever it was.
Yeah, whatever it was. You had to own land. You had to have money in the bank, and you had to be 3 or 4 different conditions had to be met.
Right. And now I'm not advocating for that, but there is a certain logic to it, and the logic really is, to put it into the vernacular, if you're going to vote, you have to have skin in the game, and it doesn't make sense. On a certain level, it doesn't make sense for voters in large numbers to be essentially voting to receive benefits, money, when they're not actually contributing anything into the pot that they're receiving the benefits
It's the ultimate in charity. It's the ultimate in socialism, not socialism, but charity by government decree. It's like when people go on welfare. What they're really doing is walking up and down the street, banging on their neighbors' doors, asking for money to subsidize their lifestyle.
Right. Yeah.
I'm being harsh, but that's
no. I mean, that's the reality. That's what makes some of this stuff so complicated. But interesting. Just on the subject of income taxes, I was speaking with somebody who's fairly politically connected provincially today, who was talking about the fact that the provincial government in Ontario here is talking about cutting provincial income tax, and I just wanted to say again, the problem with this that makes it so complicated is that federal income tax is not collected. You do pay provincial income tax, but it's not collected provincially. It's collected by the federal government, and then the federal government takes the portion of income tax that belongs to the province and gives it to them. So the federal government collects it on behalf of the province. So, but a lot of people, because they don't see a provincial income tax deduction in their paycheck, in their pay stubs, okay, don't actually really appreciate the fact that they're actually paying provincial income tax in addition to federal income tax. So as a political thing, reducing provincial income tax really is not a very smart way to go about reducing taxes. If you want to boost the economic activity, at least in the province, it makes far more sense. And this may not make economic sense, okay? You're going to find economists that are going to argue against what I'm going to say, but from a political point of view, it makes far more sense to reduce the provincial portion of the HST, which is actually more than half. 8%, HST in Ontario is 13%, and 8% of that, or 8 points, is provincial, and 5 is federal. So, reduce the provincial amount from 8% to 5%, you'd have a 10% sales tax in Ontario, and you're giving people a real break, and that will boost economic activity. Now, there are economists that are going to go and say no, it makes more sense to have consumption taxes, which is what a sales tax is, as opposed to an income tax. So there are going to be arguments on both sides. But from a political point of view, I do not understand the argument of reducing provincial income tax, because provincial income tax payers do not ever see that tax. They might get a refund at the end of the year.
Well, this is also part of the shell game government's, especially federal play. Here's 100. With the carbon tax as an example. Well, we're going to give you back more than you spend. Well, that defeats the whole purpose. But people like the idea of getting more than they spent. They feel like they're ripping off the man. Well, guess who the man is? It's not Pierre Trudeau.
Well, it's me.
Or Elliot. It's you and I.
Yeah, it's the middle class.
Yeah, exactly. They're hurting their neighbor, and they're hurting themselves. They just don't realize it. So these continuous shell games should be called out for what they are. And I get mighty tired of people who go, yeah, well, I'm getting back $2,000. What you don't understand is that it costs you more to get the $2,000 back from the government than they took from your taxes, because the machinery of government's mighty sticky when it comes to dollar bills. So you might get back $2,000, but it probably costs them $400 or $500 just to get it to you.
Yeah, whatever it works out to. You're not wrong. You're not wrong, Nick.
So this has been a pet peeve. I've always been of the believer, if the province wants to make a difference, do it in areas of their own jurisdiction. And I know people don't understand. I bring this up and people laugh at me, but I'm going to keep beating this drum. Take those little stickers off the back of the license plates. I'm not saying do away with the license plate. I'm saying the little once-a-year sticker is nothing but a cash grab, and it needs to go. You want to win some votes? You tell the average driver, and there's millions of them in this province, that you're going to save them at least $120 a year per car, and that will mean a huge amount to them. Think of the trucking companies, taxi companies, bus companies, all these companies that run a fleet. Every single one has to be. Why do police cars carry a sticker on? Aren't we taxing? That's like we had this discussion about when you pay civil servants. Why bother charging them taxes? Why not just take the taxes off and then pay them the difference? Why do police cars carry not safety stickers, but license plate stickers?
It's obviously too complicated for me, and I will say this, Nick. If I had the choice between eliminating the annual renewal of licensing of your car license by purchasing a sticker, or cutting income tax provincially, I go your route. Because it just makes more sense politically, for sure.
Absolutely, because you get the benefit. Not only do you get the benefit, you get the credit. Like your people who you do this for recognize where it comes from.
Okay, well, we are reaching the end of our line here today, Nick. So,
one spicy meatball.
Okay, I'm not even going to add to that. We'll see you next week in the combat zone.